حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. All right, everyone who is getting ready to pray, please go to the prayer room. It is at the door, the next room over there.
Just gonna leave my things.
Test, test, 1, 2. Test, test, 1, 2. Test, test, 1, 2. Test.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm going to ask you to please hurry up and take your seats. We do need to get started. We have a very important conversation today, and we'd like to get through it in a timely manner. So please hurry on up and grab your seats, and inshallah, we will get started momentarily. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm going to ask you to please make your way to your seats. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Inshallah, make your way in. Please grab your seats. We're going to be starting in just a few seconds.
Oh, indeed.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to do it one more time, and inshallah, that means we are officially getting started. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace. We begin with Bismillah, and we ask Allah to center our intentions. Inshallah, we are looking for a fruitful and engaging conversation today, and we thank all of you for being here with us. Welcome to the conversation with Dr. Cornel West and Dr. Jill Stein. Dr. West and Dr. Stein are both 2024 third-party candidates running for the presidential election. And our goal today is to have a very deliberate conversation so that we are part of the US democratic process. We believe that an educated voter is an empowered voter. So we have created this forum so that we can learn together today, inshallah. This is a nonpartisan 501c3 event. All candidates that we were aware of that are running for the presidential election were emailed and invited to attend today. My name is Arshia Ali Khan. I am a founding member of the Muslim Civic Coalition. I am the CEO of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, and I am the new chairwoman of the U.S. Council for Muslim Organizations. Thank you. It is my distinct honor to welcome you all today for this deliberate conversation. As a mother of a 15-year-old, it is my honor to share the stage with this young leader beside me, Adam Khaltoum, a high school freshman.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Thank you so much. I'm Adam Katoum. I'm 15 years old. I am from Peoria, Illinois. I am one of the co-founders of the Peoria for Palestine Coalition. And right now, we are working on a ceasefire act in Peoria, Illinois. To get more information on that, please visit peoriaforpalestine.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Can we get a real big round of applause for him? 15-year-old, guys. And he is the founder of a coalition, so that's amazing. So Illinois has 102 counties, so let's get a sense of who's in the room with us. I represent Lake County, so who's in the room from Lake County? Clap. Make some noise, guys.
Make some noise for Lake County.
Okay, Adam is representing Peoria County, so who do we have here from Peoria County? According to the Illinois Muslims Report, our state, Illinois, has the largest per capita Muslims in the nation. So let's get a sense of who else is in the room with us. Let's start with Cook County. Cook County represented. DuPage County. Cook County, DuPage County, I'm not sure. Will County. A lot of Will County over here. Any other counties? McHenry County. Any other states? Woo! We are here live today, and we also are on Facebook Live. So if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please enter your county or state in the Facebook Live chat. As a civic organization, we'd also like to acknowledge our faith leaders. If you're a faith leader, please rise and get your applause. Elected officials, please rise and take your applause. Council generals and other public officials, please rise and take your applause. Once again, on behalf of the Muslim Civic Coalition and our partners, I'd like to thank you all for being here with us today and joining us in person and on Facebook at Muslim Civic Coalition. Alhamdulillah, in just a few days, thank you, President Dilara Saeed, for hosting us and putting this together. We had 500 people register in, I said 2, she said 3, so 3 days. MashaAllah, and many more obviously watching us on Facebook Live and in other places. We have your contact information, and we will continue to provide more information and be close to you and share more information on all of the electoral processes that are coming your way. And I'd like to now pass it to Adam.
Who organized these events? Partners and organization and board, please stand up and stay standing.
Partner organization. So whoever was part of putting this event together, please rise.
I will now name out the organizations. The Muslim Civic Coalition, Muslim Legal Fund America, CIOGC, AVCS, NAACP, ShyCare, Chicago Young Muslims, Arab American 4, Arab Muslims for Palestine, Muslim Visionaries, Peoria for Palestine, Iman, Mosque Foundation, and finally ISNS. Thank you so much to the Muslim Civic Coalition for bringing us all together and managing the relationship with the candidates and the logistics for today's event. You will get a text just now with the link to the program document online. It has the program and the bios of all speakers. If you have a question during the program, we will collect them and either ask today or have candidates answer, and we will email the response to you response to you this week. Water is available in the back of the room. Washrooms are in the hall, and if you need help, raise your hand and an usher will come by to help. March 19th is the primary election in Illinois. March 19th. Please add that to all of your calendars. If you are from another state, please check your election cycle and add it to your calendar. Look at your cards on your seat. The first card,
One card has 3 sections.
register and ready. If it says you are not at the link, you can register today. Forms are available if you raise your hand or go to the voter registration table. Step 2, pledge to vote. We will send you updates and reminders. We will even drive you to the polls. Step 3. Ooh, I skipped one. Ooh. Let me say the step 2 one first. Get my ballot. You can see your ballot for March 19 primary election. Now, we are ready to vote. Who do we vote for? I'm passing it to Arshia.
Well, we all know President Biden. We all know former President Trump. But today, we're here to learn from 2 third-party candidates who have both called for a ceasefire.
The first conversation is with Dr. Cornel West. Tariq Khalil of American Muslims for Palestine and Dr. Dalara Sayed of the Muslim Civic Coalition. Louder. The second conversation will be with Dr. Jill Stein, Shafiq Abu Bakr of CIOGC, and Alaya Bilal of Iman. Let's get started!
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. These are exciting times. These are also really challenging times. I want to just take a minute for all of us to make Surah Fatiha for those who have passed in Gaza, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Syria, in India, in Rohingya communities, and across the world, Venezuela, so many others. So we'll just take a minute, please, in whatever way you'd like. You may either take a moment of silence or say Surah Fatiha. I mentioned strife around the world, but we have strife in our own nation. We have gun violence, we have poverty, and in the largest and most powerful nation in the world, the richest nation in the world, we have way too many challenges. And so we're looking for opportunities to find leaders who can do more and who can do better. I'm honored to lead this conversation with Brother Abdullah Mitchell of CIOGC, and in conversation with Dr. Cornel West, who I met about a decade ago at St. Sabina, and every year since then at St. Sabina when he does a Black Lives Matter and a Black History Month program. So I'm sorry, this year it was not to be, but we can talk a little bit about that later. Brother Abdullah.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Once again, let me just add to what Dalara said. First, as a footnote to those prayers, don't forget those many young lives on the south side and west side of Chicago that are also lost to senseless gang violence, gun violence. So what we want to do is get right into it, Dr. West. And, you know, and reviewing your background, your biography, you're quite an accomplished person, written many books, 20 books, reviewed so many more. So we know there's exceeding intellectual capacity to address the problems that we face in this nation. But your background has been as an intellectual and as an activist. So the simple question is this: why you? Why now?
Well, let me first say that I am blessed to be here, and I salute each and every one of you who are kind enough to be here to be part of this conversation. I want to salute the visionary leaders who brought us together, facilitated our coming together, all the organizations, our dear brother and sister, and then to have these two magnificent ones as part of the dialogue. I decided that it's very important that I be true to all of the love and courage that has been poured into me by those who came before. I am who I am because somebody loved me very deeply, intensely, unequivocally, unconditionally. I'm talking about Irene and Clifton West. I'm talking about Shiloh Baptist Church. I'm talking about the Black Panther Party on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California. That's where I come from. And I intend to be true to that integrity, honesty, decency, generosity that's been poured into me. And I could never, ever in 3 or 4 lifetimes pay it back. So I begin always with a note of gratitude, a deep note of thankfulness in terms of trying to constitute be part of a movement that's constituted by that kind of commitment to love and justice and truth. So that in that sense, I've never, ever, and will never, ever consider myself a garden variety politician. That's not my calling. That's not my vocation. I am part of a movement of a great Black people who, after 244 years of being enslaved and another 100 years of being in Jim and Jane Crowed and lynched every 2.5 days for 50 years in the land of liberty, to be true to that great tradition of those Black folk. That's where I come from. And so when I think of my choice, it's not just an individual choice. You see, I'm just a small wave in a great ocean of a great tradition of a grand people. And there's never been a people in the modern world, in the new world especially, who's been so chronically hated and terrorized and traumatized as Black people. And yet every generation we generate what? Love warriors, freedom fighters, wounded healers. So I thought it's significant that tradition that produced me spill over into presidential politics. Why? Because the empire is in such spiritual decay and moral decadence. Let's just be honest about it. The levels of organized greed, the levels of institutionalized hatred, the levels of not just mediocre politicians, but downright cowardly politicians. No backbone, no spine, so tied to big money, tied to lobbies, tied to benefactors, tied to donors, that you can never, ever not just trust them, you know you will be betrayed as soon as the money flows. And it is so very clear when it comes to Gaza. What other litmus test can there be when 14,000 precious children have been killed in less than 3 months and politicians can hardly muster a word to talk about ceasefire? Ceasefire is the minimum. Ceasefire is the least. Ceasefire is easy. My God. Ending the siege, ending the occupation. What does it mean to talk about Palestinian dignity and talk about Palestinian equality? I'm concerned about my Jewish brothers and sisters and their safety and security. I'm a humanist. I believe a Jewish baby has the same value as a Palestinian baby, and a Palestinian baby has the same value as a Jewish baby. I am someone who comes out of the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer. So I'm not worried about what's coming at me. I'm going to be true to what I'm called to do. That's the fundamental thing. And so what is happening in this particular is the flow, the overflow of that tradition of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer in this highly colonized, narrow, dominated terrain called U.S. politics, where corporate America dominates, where Wall Street dominates, and where militarism dominates. Militarism usually has the last word tied to the war manufactured. You see, if you notice the stock market, all the stocks gone up for war manufacturers. Why? Because that's profit making too. There's money in it, even as those who are murdered, killed, maimed, dominated, and occupied are either rendered invisible. And you notice these days on corporate media, it's an afterthought. Genocide going on before our very eyes, and it's an afterthought. The great Rabbi Heschel used to say, indifference to evil's more insidious than evil itself. And when you're indifferent to the vulnerable, indifferent to the occupied, indifferent to the elderly, indifferent to those who have been colonized for so long, sooner or later, as Malcolm X says, and of course Malcolm, Muslim brother who constitutes in part who I am. I speak as a Christian. I don't exist without Malcolm X. I don't exist without Muhammad Ali.
All right.
As two
Thank
Muslim
you.
brothers.
Thank you.
Two free,
So,
black, Allah-loving brothers. I'm a Jesus-loving free black man. They were Allah-loving free black men.
absolutely.
Same tradition, but different religious and theological
Yeah.
orientation.
So we had
Thank
a
you.
big question that several people had asked us when we asked for questions online. First, we wanted to say one of your great books is Race Matters. So if you haven't picked up the book Race Matters, please read it or get it. I think it's important for every American to have read that book. But in that book and in your administration, so you are President Cornel West, and it is your administration. What do we do to get to a solution, to a better place with race? Our country has struggled with race since day one. I remember our family coming in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and the communities that we were welcomed by were Black and brown communities. I knew how to double Dutch before I knew you could even single Dutch, single jump rope. And then throughout my life, the struggle with race, right? The struggle with tension, white communities, Black communities, Latino communities, Native American communities, et cetera. In your administration, what will this look like? We celebrated Muhammad Ali Day. We celebrated MLK Day just now. We are in the beginning of Black History Month. In your administration, what will it look like? What will we do?
Well, it would look so qualitatively different that you would feel as if you're living in a different world. Why? Because my priorities are so qualitatively different than the priorities of both the Republican Party that's leading toward an ugly neo-fascism under the Pied Piper Trump, and under Joe Biden, enabling genocide, enabling ethnic cleansing, facilitating apartheid abroad, but also enabling grotesque wealth inequality with Wall Street priorities. What does that mean? I'm an abolitionist. Just like Frederick Douglass wanted to abolish slavery and Ida B. Wells Barnett, I say they got that wonderful street named after her in Chicago. She wanted to abolish Jim Crow. You notice they didn't want liberal versions of slavery. They didn't want liberal versions of Jim and Jane Crow. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to poverty, just like Martin King. America's the richest nation, the richest empire in the history of the world. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever that there's one poor person there unless they're voluntarily choosing poverty, like some of our blessed Catholic nuns and Catholic monks. I appreciate that. I do understand that kind of voluntary choice. Involuntary poverty. We have spent trillions and trillions of dollars just since 2001 It takes $160 billion to abolish poverty. There ought not be one homeless or unhoused person in the whole country. We have the resources for that. We have the funds for that. We've got war priorities. 62 cents for every dollar goes to the military. We got special operations in 140 nations. We've got 800 military units all around the world. That's what it means to be an empire, like the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire and the British Empire. I'm running to be head of the empire, to dismantle the empire and to take those investments in military and put it into high quality schools, universal basic income so that nobody can fall below a line. Free education. Here I'm with Brother Bernie in that regard. Free Medicare for everybody and free education. And you say, well, Brother West, how you gonna pay for it? Oh, you notice they only raise that question when it comes to basic social needs of fellow citizens. They don't raise that question when it comes to war. How you gonna pay for Iraq? How you gonna pay for Afghanistan? How you gonna pay for Libya? How you gonna pay for Syria? How you gonna pay for Ukraine? How you gonna pay for Israeli vicious attacks on Palestinian brothers? Limitless money flows. That's called warped priorities. My vision is exactly the opposite. The abolition of poverty, to make sure there's a minimum wage of $27 and support the strong wing of the trade union movement, not the trade union movement that ties itself to corporations and corporate power, but progressive trade unions. Even those trade unions, I just marched with the UAW just a couple of weeks ago, and they still came out for Biden. I say, Brother Sean, love you, brother, but hey, my God, you going with the genocide, Joe Biden too. Oh, I see. Well, it's practical politics. It's only a choice between two. Really? I come from a folk like Frederick Douglass in the 1850s who had to choose between two slaveholders running for president. Fred, who you gonna support? The liberal slaveholder or the conservative slaveholder? What did Fred do? He went third party, called the Liberty Party. Because he had a conscience, because he was concerned about the folk who were enslaved. Well, it looks like you have the chance of a snowball in hell to win. Really? Just watch the movement that's tied to the creation of this party. Within 20 years, with a barbaric civil war, we broke the back of a barbaric slaveocratic order. But electoral politics couldn't do it. Electoral politics was a gesture. The kind of change that I'm talking about is the kind of change that will never be done solely by one president, never be done by electoral politics in and of itself. Electoral politics is just a moment, just like a particular moment in a jazz song. The chord may be a little off, but it's a moment. But we're talking about the whole flow. And what I'm talking about requires social motion, social momentum, social movements, organized folk on the ground, and together we do that. That's also true in regard to Gaza. Electoral politics is not going to solve what's going on in Gaza, not at all. It's part of social movements here and around the world in solidarity with folk who are resisting and enacting resilience. That's what's going to bring about Palestinian freedom and Palestinian equality and Palestinian dignity alongside that Jewish safety and Jewish security.
Let me follow up that right quick. Clearly, you're proposing a movement. The movement means soldiers. Right now, the heart of the civil rights movement was fighting for the right to vote. Right now, we're seeing state after state attacking that right to vote, restricting that right to vote, denying access to people to vote. What and how will the West administration address securing and protecting everybody's right to vote?
Oh, I mean, it's just a matter of making sure you execute on the ground, and what you execute conforms to what you talk about on paper. See, America has some very pretty words on paper, but you always got to look at the practice. You got to look at what's happening on the ground. Think, for example, just about a year and a half ago, where Biden had a chance to suspend the filibuster and pass through the John Lewis bill. Now, John Lewis was one of the great freedom fighters, especially in the 1960s, even before he became a neoliberal politician. He was a freedom fighter of the highest level. Would they suspend the filibuster? No. Would they put pressure on Manchin? No. It died. The voting rights bill died because of Biden and the Democrats. Where's the commitment? Where's the follow through? Why is it that the voting rights bill itself needs to be renewed over and over and over and over and over again anyway, given the vicious legacy of white supremacy in the country? You would think once they have it, they have it. No, no, not at all. Not at all. The deeply conservative forces require it to be renewed over and over again. Now, once you do get the voting rights bill, and we can convince more of our fellow citizens, because 40% of our citizens don't vote at all. They dropped out. You talk to them on the street and they say, oh, Brother West, we see you running, we appreciate it, but I gave up on politics a long time ago. I know these politicians ain't nothing but figures who engage in legalized corruption and normalized bribery. I've given up on politics. That's 40%. He said, no, you got to speak to these folk. You got to give them somebody to vote for, not just vote against. You got to give them somebody who has a larger vision, somebody who's trying to create social institutions and infrastructures that are sustaining that vision. And that's why I do think it's very important that we have these kind of conversations. Yeah. And it's very important that the voices be heard that are concerned about these kind of issues.
Thank you very much. If you read the news today, anywhere, it says that our two-party system isn't working many times. It's saying that many voters are disenfranchised. When they look and ask young voters, voters of color, et cetera, some of the top reasons are, number one, they believe that age is a factor in the candidates. Number two, they believe that the promises have not been kept for people of color and for young voters, et cetera. And number three, it comes up over and over again because communities of color stand in solidarity, the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Over and over again, voters are asking our government to call for a ceasefire or to work to make this end the violence. And so what would a West administration do? People say, oh, it's complicated. Oh, it's complex. We're asking for a ceasefire, and then we're saying rebuild Gaza, and then we're saying, recognize statehood and allow leadership to flourish so this community can grow. Illinois has one of the largest populations of Arabs in the nation and the single largest Palestinian American population in the nation. There is no family who identifies as Muslim or Palestinian that has not been touched by the pain that is happening in Gaza. What would you do differently? How have they bungled it, and what would you do differently?
Well, first I would try to tell my fellow citizens the truth about what's been going on since 1917, since 1948, since 1967. All the way up to the present. See, so many fellow citizens in the country have very little sense of what the Nakba was, what the War of 67 and the occupation that followed, what the War of 73 was, what, in fact, the nature of the history of occupation and domination has been. You've got to give people a context, or they'll think it's all about October 7th. You got to give them some sense of what the larger backdrop is. Very few leaders would do that. Secondly, then, I would stand with the South African government and other governments at the International Court of Justice with American lawyers and American representatives saying, let's find out the truth in regard to the nature of the war crimes, the crimes against humanity, and the crime of genocide. Why? Because I'm concerned about the truth. And I'm concerned about the truth in each and every context. This is one crucial context, highly visible at the moment. We got to keep it visible. We got to raise our voices, even when it's no longer on corporate television. We got to make sure that the suffering is highlighted and then tell Americans what, in fact, has led toward these particular crimes. Then, when it comes to policy, you say, what would Palestine look like at the end of an occupation? Not just ceasefire and siege, but at the end of an occupation. How do we be very honest about that? Now, for so long, mainstream politicians have been talking about two-state solution, two-state solution, two-state solution. They rarely ever meant that. That was an excuse to reinforce the expanding apartheid regime. The two-state solution is dead. You got to tell the American people that. It's dead. There was a time where it was workable. It's over now. You have a choice between one state. That one state will either be an apartheid-like state with the same kinds of levels of repression, or it will be a one state with two nations, or it will be a secular state with the equality of Palestinians and Israelis across the board, with protections and safeties for each group. That's what we're talking about. Now, what does that mean for most Americans? It's going to blow their minds. What is Brother West talking about? We've been lied to all this time? I say, yes. Yes, you have. Just like the history of race in America. You've been lying about black people, been lying about indigenous people. Just like the history of patriarchy in the country, lying about women of all colors. Just like the working class, those who rule property, lying about workers. Why? Because that's how nation states and empires reproduce themselves. They're predicated on the efficacy of lies. But I come from a tradition that says, truth crushed the earth will rise again. No lie lives forever. And sooner or later, you're going to have to reap what you sow. And that's precisely what's happening in the Middle East right now. And it's going to happen in the United States. That's precisely why the challenge of fascism is so intense. People say, oh my God, is this America? When was the last time you were in the prison system and mass incarceration and saw all those precious brothers and sisters who went there? Who was the architect of that system? Joe Biden. People say, no, why would you tell that lie on him? Check it out. 1994. Check it out, what he said on the floor of Congress. Those super predators, they ought to be ashamed of themselves. We take the key and throw it away. That's Joe Biden. You say, oh, really? That's what it says on YouTube. That's him. Does that mean he's a devil? No. Does that mean he's a demon? No. He's an American politician that have been hiding and concealing some of his own crimes against black young people and other black folk. Same is true with his tie with Wall Street and corporate elites. That's why it blows my mind when I see these trade union folk talking about he's so pro-union. What did he do? He came out and marched in the rain for 90 seconds, and all of a sudden he becomes the most pro-trade union president in the history of the country. Is that Brother Dwight McKee walking in? Yes, it is. Good to see you there, brother. Lord, give it up. This is the towering black intellectual. Now this brother right here, I take a bullet for, but he knows exactly what that means. Absolutely.
Okay, and there's power to what you're saying, but we've heard such wonderful words before, and you are right. We have been burned by politicians in our community. We are still underrepresented, and we are still taken for granted as Black and brown and underrepresented communities. How will you be different, Dr. West? How will you be different to a community that is hungry for honesty and hungry for elected officials who actually care about them? Because we are taxpayers We are doctors and teachers and engineers and Uber drivers. We are union members, and we are always taken for granted by our politicians. How will you be different?
Yeah, I mean, the proof is always in the pudding. You know what I mean? And you'd have to take a look at my record for 50 years. Have I tried to tell the truth? And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak of oppressed people here and around the world. You see? How have I wavered in trying to tell the truth? Now, I'm a cracked vessel like anybody else. I'm not always right. But one thing I'm not a coward. I'm not a coward. I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. I'd rather be dead than afraid. That's the kind of people I come from. You see? Meaning what? Just go back in all the fights with Harvard presidents, not just the Palestinian issues, but just the truth telling itself. And what do I tell them? Truth is always more important. I learned that in Vacation Bible School in Shiloh Baptist Church that had to do with integrity, honesty, decency. And I was told if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave some heaven behind. And that's not just words. That's not just words. Well, Brother West, how come you were so hard on Obama? I love Obama. He's a beautiful black woman with a beautiful black family. When he sides with Wall Street and drops drones on brothers and sisters in Libya and so forth, I come at him like anybody else because I believe in righteous indignation. It's not a question of skin pigmentation. It's a question of morality and spirituality. Across the board. Same is true in any context. I can go to Iran. I got critiques of my Muslims in Iran. I'm in solidarity with Woman Life Freedom Movement. They say, oh, Brother West, how can you engage in that kind of critique? I thought that you were. I believe in morality and spirituality in a consistent sense. And if it's only a matter of popularity, is empty. It's about integrity and honesty. Same would be true with Muslims in China. Any oppressed people, no matter where they are, I stand in solidarity with them. In Brazil, in Guatemala, my gay brothers and sisters in Uganda. That's who I am. I stand with them. But I start with my black folk on the chocolate side of town. That's very important. Because if you love everybody but the folk who loved you, something's wrong. Your love is not real. You're not really willing to sacrifice and pay the cost. And that's the legacy of a Fannie Lou Hamer and a Martin King and Malcolm, Curtis Mayfield out of Chicago. We could go on and on. Nina Simone out of North Carolina, John Coltrane out of North Carolina. Those are my people. That's where I come from. That doesn't mean I'm as good as them, but at least I know what the standards are.
Let me follow that real quick, because we're coming towards the end. I mean, you've given us a very powerful message. And you've made some strong promises to us. What the question now, I guess, is as a third party, there may be doubters in the mind that says, oh, we only have to go A or B. Can there be a C? Can there be a viable third party candidate that can win the presidency? The first question is how are you going to get on the ballot everywhere? Because that may be a question that they're asking. Give us the vision that you can become the next president of the United States.
Oh, appreciate that question. Appreciate that question. I'm looking right now at my dear brother Anthony Rogers Wright, who's one of my part of the quartet. Give it up for this brother. He's one of the campaign managers. One of the campaign managers. We already got Alaska. We already got Oregon. We already got Nebraska. We're moving on Utah. We should have 15 states by the Ides of March. That's March 15th. We hope to have 30 states by the summer and at least 40 some at the end. Now, there's certain states that make it so very, 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 very difficult that you're going to have to hit the lotto with millions of dollars. And see, I don't have a pack at all. I don't have a pack at all. So that we have money flowing, but not that millions, millions, and millions and millions and millions. You see. So that places like New York, gonna fight like I don't know what, but you got 42 days, 46,000 signatures. One out of the two signatures are always invalid, so you really need 72,000. And it's the Democratic Party who's making the decision. You realize how fair and just that's going to be. So if we get on about 44, 45, and maybe even 50, we're going to surprise some people. I'm thoroughly convinced that Biden may do an LBJ thing and not even run at all as the pressure continues on him and his son. They keep trying to push him out, but more and more it's clear that he's running out of gas. Trump may be on his way to jail. So what happens for the B team? What happens for the B team for the neo-fascist Republican Party? What happens for the B team for the neoliberal Democratic Party? Both of them have a weak bench. Weak B team. And then here come those of us trying to tell the truth. We don't have to put down to worry about wearing a mask. We don't have to worry about big money. We just speak from our hearts and minds and souls and the traditions and the people who poured love and justice and integrity inside of us so we can be free. The only thing in the end, and this is the history of the country, the only thing in the end that really puts a momentary stop to the fire of oppressed people are bullets. Because once we get to the point where it looks like we're about to win, then they want to shoot us down. That's the history of Martin and Malcolm and Fannie Lou and others when it comes to black people, when it comes to working people, when it comes to those who are reaching the point where they're really going to make the breakthrough. And at that point, it's just a question of who's willing to pay the cost and to pass that rich legacy on to those who come before. Because if all you can do is stop our bodies functioning, but our spirits are strong as ever, that's still not good enough. That's inadequate. The tradition has already been reinforced. The genie's out of the bottle and the chickens are coming home to roost. And no one of us are indispensable. We're all in it together, all of us in it together based on morality, spirituality, whether you're Muslim or Christian or Buddhist like bell hooks or a Hindu like Gandhi or an atheist like James Baldwin or somebody who haven't yet decided but just wants to be a freedom fighter. Yes, indeed.
Well, thank you so much again. You align very much with many of our issues. So we're all looking at your website. We're all reading the material. But there are two other demographics that are really struggling right now, and we need you to address to see how your administration would manage. One is young families and young individuals. This is the first time in American history that we may have a younger generation that may not be able to live as successfully as their elder generation. How many of us have young people in our families, in their Gen Z or millennials, or are Gen Z and millennials right now in here? Look at it. The Muslim community in America is not only the most diverse faith community, we are the youngest faith community in America. That's right. Many of our Latino brothers and sisters, African American brothers and sisters, and Native American brothers and sisters have very large youth populations. How will you help younger communities, younger families be able to afford good housing, good schools, good education, student loan debt? We have so many challenges with our young families that we need you to address. And I'll say the other one as well, because we're just about out of time. The other is our migrant crisis, our asylum seekers crisis, and our new Americans. How many of us at one point or another were new Americans because we immigrated to this nation? Or our parents did, or our grandparents did. So many of us here. So we talked about gun violence and voter rights for Black Americans and Black and Brown Americans. We're now talking about some of the challenges for immigrants that are being faced, which include gun violence and voter rights, and then all of the other ways that we are new Americans. So young people, new Americans. How do we support them?
This has been wonderful. questions and so forth. I must say this is really what political discourse that has a moral and spiritual dimension is all about. I always like to remind my precious fellow citizens who came to the United States after 1965 that immigration bill was a gift of the Black freedom movement. Very important to keep in mind. They had already excluded the Chinese. They excluded Asians in the 1880s. When the Klan emerged in the 20s, they had the immigration bill of 1924, which meant it would be only the countries from Western Europe. And between 1924 and 1965, the waves coming into America were a vanilla affair. Lily white like the National Hockey League. And I ain't got nothing against hockey, but it's a little different than the National Basketball Association. 65 opened the gates, all these beautiful, magnificent folk from Africa and Asia. Now the Caribbeans had already come through New York and Chicago and so forth, but even they began to come. Ethiopia, all these beautiful folk. Here come all these Muslims. The only Muslims we knew were Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's the first Muslims I met. And they didn't dance, and I like to dance. So we had some fascinating tension and conversation. But they were products of the Black church, right? He's the Reverend Elijah Poole, Baptist minister before he was Elijah Muhammad. Just like Malcolm X's father is a Baptist minister before he's Malcolm X. There are still some continuities. I say that because it's very important that we have to recognize some of the tensions that can be built in our relations so that we do not look at each other through white supremacist lens. Very important. You can be an immigrant from anywhere. When you come to America, you get Americanized. And to be Americanized is to look at the world through white supremacist lens and look at Black people with, in the sense that we're stereotypes. And we have to undergo transformation. We could look at immigrants through white supremacist lens. We've got to shatter those lenses to have solidarity with each other based on our moral and spiritual connections and our political solidarity. Meaning what? Meaning then that as president, leader, spokesperson, I've got to set that atmosphere, that framework over and over and over again in speeches and then translate it into policy. I do have a preference. My preference actually begins with the elderly because I'm old school. You see, I don't think any elderly person ought to ever even think about poverty, think about food, think about shelter, think about, after all they've given us, and that's how they spend the latter part of their years, how spiritually obscene can we be? And then we shift to the younger folk. Then we shift to the younger folk and say, we are giving you priorities. We're going to make sure you are gaining access to school. You gain access to jobs. You gain access to a safe community. But, and here let's be very honest, because we live in a deep moment of spiritual crisis. And spirituality has to do with what is your conception of integrity and honesty and love and compassion and empathy. People can have access to all the money in the world and still be gangsters because their souls hasn't been cultivated. They haven't been taught how to connect and relate to other people as thou, in the language of the great Martin Buber, thou rather than it. Persons rather than objects. And our young people have been bombarded by the market. So they're told life is about success, material toys, status, and money. And we're here to say, even politicians, we are about moral and spiritual greatness. And in my Bible, he or she is greatest among you will be your servant, will care the most, will be concerned the most, will sacrifice the most, will be of use to somebody else, not just themselves. So our young people have been shaped by a market culture that is hedonistic, narcissistic, careerist, and inward looking and navel gazing. And we need to shatter that with what? Spiritual and moral renaissance by examples. And there we're talking about something beyond politics. We're talking about something human. We're talking about something in relation to something bigger than ourselves. And for those of us who are still religious, it's about God. For Christians, it's about Jesus. For Muslims, it's about Allah. For Buddhists, it's about Buddha. And if you're secular, it's about compassion, empathy, democracy, equality, something bigger than your ego, something bigger than just you.
Well, it's about time to wrap this up. And we don't really want to stop. I can see the audience could go on and on, you know, but to be fair to all the candidates, we have to bring it to wrap it up. But on behalf of all the sponsors of this program this evening, we extend our warmest thanks and gratitude for you to take time out from your campaign to come to speak to the Muslims of Greater Chicago. We have heard, we have listened, now we must act.
Oh, thank
All
you
right.
all so very much. Stay strong in your work. Stay strong in your work. Indeed. Stay strong in your work. Very much so.
Dr. West, we also want to make sure that you know we would like to continue more conversations. Several states have asked us to help them invite you to their states. We'd like a commitment from you that it is now February 3rd, but between now and November 5th, that you will come again and again and again to our different communities when asked.
Absolutely.
And we would like a commitment from you that as the election ends, and if you are to become the President of the United States of America, that you will meet with us within 50 days of your presidency beginning, and then continue to meet with us on policy and issues.
Ooh, absolutely. Started my campaign in Mississippi because Mississippi is ground zero for the Black freedom struggle. Alabama's number 2. So I'm going to Mississippi, Alabama, and then come to Oak Brook, Illinois right after.
Assalamu alaikum. That was energizing. Let's keep the energy going. Alhamdulillah. We have with us candidate Jill Stein. I'm going to get straight to it. So I believe this is your 3rd time running for president. You're a trained physician. You're an advocate for environmental health. You're an organizer. You do a lot already, and you chose to run again. Is the 3rd time a charm? Tell us why you're doing this once again and why.
Great. Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Oh.
It's okay. You can take mine.
Okay. Are we on? All right, we are on. Yes, I mean, I think the time is a charm. And the time leaves us no choice. And this is a time for a moral reckoning. I think the genocide being live streamed onto our phones, onto our computers, onto our television sets really challenges our humanity. And are we going to step up and meet this moment? And I think this moment is meeting us. And we see that who would have expected that up to 68% of the American public agrees with us? We are not alone. We are Gaza. It is impossible. It is impossible to be awake, to be a human being, and not feel Gaza every moment. The barbarity of this genocide that is being conducted before our eyes on little babies, on mothers. I think it's 10 mothers that are being killed every day. It is 1,000 children who have undergone amputations without anesthesia because of the horrific, complete siege, a medieval siege that was imposed on the people of Gaza by the Netanyahu administration. What was it, the 10th of October, roughly? No food, no water, no medicine, no electricity. This is barbarity that the world has never seen. And in fact, that has been documented now, that the deaths, the civilian deaths, their intensity is unprecedented. The physical destruction is unprecedented. I'll tell you, I did not intend to run a third time. My family had had enough. And I heard that from them in great quantity. But what happened was that, I have worked for many years, for decades actually. I describe myself as a mother on fire, as any mother is, who is looking around the world nowadays and just seeing the crushing inequality, the war, the starvation, the misery, the injustice. It's absolutely unacceptable. With my background as a medical doctor, I had really dedicated my life, my professional career to, I say, clinical medicine, to healing, to health. And after doing that for a couple decades, I realized health cannot happen just in the clinic or in the doctor or nurse's office. Health has to be a way of life in a community. Health is the economy. Health is job opportunities. Health is education. Health is a sense of justice and hope. And I realized as a doctor that was working to clean up some of the environmental drivers of chronic disease, really to clean the air, to stop the pollution of our air and our food supply. And that really got to me. And that was my work parallel to clinical medicine until I realized it's not going anywhere. We have a bigger illness than any of those illnesses. That illness is our political system. So instead of practicing clinical medicine, I transitioned into practicing political medicine because it's the mother of all illnesses. And we have to fix that one. So to make a long story short, I had helped recruit another candidate to run in the Green Party slot. We have a lot of ballot lines. We have cultivated those ballot lines in order to fight the power, in order to fight empire, in order to fight oligarchy, because you can't fight on your first rodeo. You really have to know how to do it. You have to be able to get on the ballot. You have to be on the ballot in order to actually threaten empire. You may have a very powerful message and have a very important role to play. But if you can't actually challenge power, they can write you off. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. In my mind, I have worked for many years to help develop that access to the ballot. We have a position on the ballot so that we can challenge power. I stepped in when that role was vacated because I did not want to see that capacity go down the drain. If you don't use it, you will lose it. I had a big argument with Ajamu Baraka, my running mate in 2016. I wanted him to run. He wanted me to run. And he won that argument, I'm sorry to say, mainly by his personal circumstances, and that he couldn't. And there were very few people who could mobilize on a dime. We had very little time. We had deadlines. So that's the story, really. I did not want to see the power that we had developed go down the drain. And then, after we had made that decision, but before we announced, Gaza happened. And I thanked the powers of the universe that we would be able to use the power of our ballot access to fight the empire.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Stein. And I am sure I speak for many in here when I say that your passion for the issue really speaks loudly and has been a needed voice at this time. I want to ask you, as you know, being from Chicago, right? Highland Park, Chicago, of course, is a very diverse city, and the Muslim community is a very diverse community, one of the most diverse in the country. Chicago boasts one of the most diverse and, of course, the highest per capita community of Muslims in the city. And of course, that means that we are beyond a single issue community. We are a community that is for many, many, many issues, that believes in the importance of many, many issues. And I wonder, we entered Black History Month 3 days ago. We here in Illinois, we of course just came out of a January where we were commemorating both Martin Luther King as well as Muhammad Ali. And I wonder, these dates on the calendar are important and commemorating them is important, but how do we get beyond just relegating Black history and the state of Black affairs in this country to those days and really start actually fighting for the things that those figures were fighting for all those years ago? How do we make those central points in the work that we're doing, and how will you do that as President of the United States?
Wonderful, wonderful questions. And I will say that both Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X are heroes of mine, and they inspire what I do and what I wake up every morning to do and what my goals and agenda are. I would say no one is really more of a guiding light to me than Martin Luther King, and I very much feel his wisdom. Every day he is being proven so right. And I think, for example, of his triple evil of militarism, materialism, and racism, how they go together. And that so inspires me to work on the big picture. We cannot allow ourselves to get diverted onto the window dressing. We need a big agenda. And right now, that agenda is really forcing itself on us. What we're seeing in Gaza is not just limited to Gaza. This is really an expression of militarism totally run amok. I mean, it has gone to the dogs for a long time. You can look at the post 9/11 wars, for example. the death toll from the post 9/11 wars in Iraq alone, it was 1 million deaths that our country was responsible for. Many of us were fighting this tooth and nail. I'm sure everyone in this room was fighting that tooth and nail even before it began. We knew where that war was going to go. 1 million deaths in Iraq for weapons of mass destruction that never existed. But it didn't stop there. There have been a whole series of Iraq disasters and Afghanistan disasters and Libya and Syria. Those deaths amount now to 6 million people who've been sacrificed on the altar of the American empire. For me, this is a central concept, and I take my inspiration here from Martin Luther King. This is a central concept. And as he pointed out, during the Vietnam War, there could be no peace at home while we are pouring our resources into an unjust colonial war overseas. These two are joined. How do we address the needs of the Black community or the Muslim community or the Hispanic community or any other oppressed community? We cannot do that while we are the biggest empire in the history of the world that is doubling down with colonialism, with exploitation, with a predatory economy. The US has a military policy called full spectrum dominance. Does that name ring a bell? It's not widely known. But if you dig into this, this was the policy that was announced during the breakup of the Soviet Union, after the Soviet Union went down. So it was 1990. We announced our military policy, full spectrum dominance. That means the US will be the sole global power all across the world, in all regions, for all time, and in all theaters of war, whether it's in the air, on the sea surface, submarines, cyberspace, you know it. We will dominate. The US is still committed to that policy. Even though we are a faltering empire, we are an aging empire, we are an end-stage empire. That empire is not only wreaking havoc on the larger world, it's also wreaking havoc here at home. We spend half of our budget, half of our congressional budget is spent on these wars and the endless war machine. So we don't have that budget to provide quality schools for everyone. The federal government should be equalizing all school budgets so that no community has to live without adequate schools. We should have quality housing. Housing should not be an investment for the wealthy to increase their wealth. And that's what it's become. Half of renters now are paying more than 1/3 of their total income just to keep a roof over their heads. This is absolutely untenable. We had 3 million evictions last year. So many families are living in utter stress and strain. We could easily provide more public housing, ensure that there is a right to affordable housing for every American. This is one of many things that we should be doing. We cannot do that while we are dedicated to being the dominant military empire. We spend more than the next 9 biggest spenders combined. It's totally off the top. It endangers us. It puts our servicemen and women in the line of fire, like the 3 soldiers who were just killed in Jordan, for which now Joe Biden is using that as an excuse to be bombing Iran's forces around the Middle East. This is endangering all of us. What exactly are our forces? I think there are some 50,000 now around the Middle East. What are they doing there in the first place? The whole concept of empire needs to be challenged. And let me also say, we have the wind at our back here. The American people do not approve of this. We need to convert our expenditures on the military into a war tax. So everybody knows how much you are paying for these wars that are endangering us. For example, in the post 9/11 wars, we have spent, each family averaged out has spent approximately $50,000 per family to conduct these wars. This year, each family will be spending about $12,000 to conduct these wars. If we start labeling it a war tax, I think it's daring to challenge power. That's the missing link here. There are so many arguments where the American people already broadly stand with us. This is about standing up and fighting on ground that we can defend, where we can move forward, where we can bring people together, find common ground, pass legislation, and completely change the landscape, the moral landscape, and the practical and material landscape abroad and here at home. We can do this.
That's how you touch on 10 different issues in one answer. That was absolutely phenomenal. But let's talk Palestine just for a brief minute here. Okay, so I mean, you've obviously called for a ceasefire from day one, and that's the bare minimum, as Dr. Cornel West said. So I expect that from progressive candidates. I would expect that from a candidate that's based on morality and truth and justice. But you also said that you want to see a free Palestine. The only Palestinian congressperson in Congress, Rashida Tlaib, was recently censured for describing the scope of that to mean free Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. So we all know what is happening in Gaza right now. 25,000 plus killed, 70,000 plus wounded, etc. The north of Gaza is entirely wiped out. 14 of the 36 hospitals are barely functional. The rest are totally not functional at all. And there's 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza. A lot of them are going through postmortem C-sections and so on and so on and so on. The horror stories. Babies blown to smithereens with our tax money, $3.8 billion a year with our tax dollars, and a potential $14.3 billion additional aid. So, what is your overall policy on Israel-Palestine? What do you mean by a free Palestine? And will you end U.S. aid to Israel if you become president?
Absolutely. I have already called for ending all aid to apartheid Israel. A ceasefire by itself won't hold. It doesn't address the problem. It will keep coming up. We have to address the fundamental crisis from the beginning of the state of Zionist Israel. And let me quote here, let me quote the Hasidic super Orthodox rabbis who oppose Zionism. And they were asked by a friend of mine, Miko Peled. Anybody know Miko? Miko asked these rabbis, why do they oppose Zionism? And what they said was, it's anti-Jewish. And he said, oh, how is it anti-Jewish? And they said, one commandment is thou shalt not kill. The other commandment is thou shalt not steal. In my view, it's very simple. This is not complicated. This is about insisting that all parties comply with international law. That is what the International Court of Justice just said. That's what anyone with open eyes has seen. That is what the United Nations has voted for over and over again. This is not rocket science. This is about telling the truth. The people of Gaza have told the world the truth. In their unbelievable, horrific sacrifice, they are telling the truth every day. The truth is there to be seen. It is very hard to disguise. It has already persuaded 2/3 of the American public who understand there must be a ceasefire. Even before the IJC ruled, or rather the ICJ ruled, already over 30% of the American public agreed this is genocide. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to recognize genocide when you see it. I think by giving voice and refusing to be silenced, like everyone in this room, by having the courage of our convictions, we are a force for justice. As I think it was Martin Luther King who said, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It doesn't bend by itself. We have to do the bending. And we are doing that bending. And by continuing to give voice to this moral crisis that is in every one of our faces, in our laps, in our kitchen tables, we are surrounded by this right now. We are paying for it. We are all impoverished by it. We are all endangered by it. The US has sent one nuclear submarine to the shores of Gaza. As far as we know, that nuclear submarine does not carry nuclear weapons. Some of them do not. Most of them do, and we don't know where most of them are. So, as a matter of policy, we never know. But what I want you to know, okay, the US is bombing a whole lot of countries right now, and we're not exactly bombing Iran, but we're kind of bombing Iran. Iran recently established a mutual defense treaty with Russia. This was hardly given any recognition in the press. Okay, Russia's a nuclear power. This could get very nuclear very quickly. That's why this endangers us all. One nuclear submarine carries 4,000 Hiroshima bombs. 4,000. You don't have to be in the neighborhood to be wiped out by that. 4,000 Hiroshima bombs, if they went off, is enough to cause what's called nuclear winter, which basically wipes out agriculture around the world. That would be enough to pretty much knock off half the world's population, maybe all of it, by basically kicking up a whole lot of dust and debris into the atmosphere, which then blocks sunlight, and then agriculture production goes down for years. So we're talking extinction events here. We cannot take these conflicts for granted. Our misleaders take them for granted because they are paid to take them for granted, not only by AIPAC, but also by the weapons lobby and the weapons industry, the war profiteers who call the shots on Capitol Hill. The American people are fed up with this. They don't buy it. Remember, 63%, an all-time record of the American public, now says they want a different political party, one that's not throwing us under the bus. They are ready for change. What change needs is a spark. There is no bigger spark than what's going on in genocide right now. That spark could light a fire of incredible change that we cannot even imagine right now, because the American people are fed up. They are tired themselves of being thrown under the bus. And what's happening in Gaza is the last straw for so many people. I say stand up. Keep standing up. You already are standing up and leading the way. And my incredible gratitude goes out to everyone here, and the organizers especially, for catalyzing this conversation and pushing the envelope, because this is the time. This is the time to say no to the parties of war and Wall Street who have not changed their ways in decades, who have only gotten more and more corrupted, more and more the instrument of the weapons industry. This is the time for us to stand up and for the people of Gaza to be inspiring us, and for Muslims and the Arab American community to lead the charge here in declaring a new era of political morality, and to say we are going to own our politics and we're moving forward. We will not be stopped.
Thank you for that, Dr. Stein. So I want to bring it back a little more locally now. So Chicago, you know that in the last year, even, we've had an influx of folks coming from various places around the world as migrants, as asylum seekers. Chicago, of course, has had to, absorb hundreds and hundreds of these individuals coming, in need of basic aid, basic support. I work for an organization that has a federally qualified health center that has found itself having to be on the front line of making sure that these individuals, these families, these children are cared for, are their basic needs being met as the city finds itself around this issue. My question for you is, as President of the United States, what would you do to handle our current immigration crises, and what would you do to ensure that the cities and states that are having to, that are overwhelmed, quite frankly, but are still trying to meet these individuals with the kind of care and the dignity that they deserve, are not compromised by being able to serve them, but also serve the individuals in their communities that are already struggling to begin with?
Great question. And let me just say that instead of spending billions of dollars building walls that will not keep desperate people out, instead of spending billions of dollars on enforcement, which does not solve the problem, we need to go back to the drawing boards on the federal budget, on immigration, and fulfill our legal and moral obligation to respect and to treat with dignity and to provide services for people who are seeking asylum and seeking refuge in this country, especially because the actions of the United States around the world have played a major role, probably the major role, in creating the displacement to start with that is driving people here. And there are a couple levels here. Number one, we have to treat with dignity and respect the people who are here. Stop separating families. Stop jailing people who are coming out of desperation. And provide them the supports that they need, the civil services, the job placements, the training, etc. We know that immigrants more than pay their own way. This fact seems to have been lost. But when immigrants go to work, they generate a lot of dollars that they do not use because they're not citizens, so they're not eligible to use them. But they are paying their Social Security tax, their payroll taxes, and so on. So they are paying their way here. The problem is the federal government has fallen into this kind of crisis mode and is not providing critical services. That should not be on cities and states. This should be federal. At the same time, we have to shut down the spigot that's driving people here, both through the war on drugs, which creates enormous violence, and that violence is driving people to flee. We need to shut down the exploitation, the corporate predation that is destabilizing economies around the world. You can go all the way back to Guatemala in the 1950s, where we overthrew the government on behalf of United Fruit so that they didn't have to worry about social reforms and they could keep their land monopolies and so on. We destabilized Guatemala, you know, and I think they just elected a president who can start to handle this, but it has been generation after generation of just one terror after another. Look at Chile, where we supported the overthrow of their democratically elected democratic socialist president, and brought in, you know, and we brought in decades of this ferocious fascist government that murdered and disappeared tens of thousands of people. We have created these waves of migration. Look at the sanctions that the US is imposing now on Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela. That's what's destabilizing those economies and driving people here. It's not the only thing, but it is a major player. So there are things that we can do right away that can turn off the spigot that's driving refugees to our country. My understanding is that people don't want to leave their homes. My grandparents were immigrants, and the knowledge passed down in our family was that they didn't want to leave, but they had to leave. They were fleeing pogroms. They were fleeing for their lives. They were fleeing because their children were being conscripted at age 4, 5, and 6 into the army. So those families left, and when they left, they had to leave certain loved ones behind. You know, so migration is not an easy thing to do. What I've heard from migrant after migrant is that this is a last resort. So we have to stop destabilizing communities. We have to stop forcing people to flee horrific circumstances. That's how we begin to solve this in a holistic, loving, and community-oriented way.
You know, interestingly, that 1973 coup d'etat in Chile happened on 9/11 as well. So whenever we commemorate the 9/11s, I always include them as part of the mix for the commemoration for that day. Yes. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit here. I want to talk about an issue that impacts many Americans and hasn't impacted them as much during COVID, but now that the student loan payments have come back, to front and center again. You've said that you wanted to wipe out student debt as fast as the federal government bailed out the banks in 2008. So, question is, there's a lot of criticism of that approach. I love that approach, but there's a lot of criticism of it. So tell me how you can achieve that. Where would the funding come from? How do you respond to the critiques of that approach? Bernie Sanders had got a lot of heat when he ran for president and called for the same measures. So tell me how you would fund for it. How would you achieve it as president?
So let me just first assert the principle that if we could come up with trillions of dollars to bail out Wall Street, remember that? When the American people were calling their elected officials to say, don't bail them out. Calls were running at least 9-1 to say, don't bail them out. But what did Congress do? They bailed them out to the tune of trillions of dollars, and it took them about a week. So I just want to dispute that this is a real issue. This is a fake issue, and we just have to stand up to it. Now, there are many ways that it can be fixed. You're talking here about 44 million people. Let me say, there is no doubt that the best investment we ever make is in our children. We know that when we paid for public higher education with the GI Bill, every dollar invested repaid $7 back. In the case of eliminating debt, we're basically freeing up people to participate in the economy. So it is a huge economic stimulus. And whenever you think about what the cost of something is, you also have to look at what is the benefit. So we have some wonderful economists who are on our team now, and we will be putting out a specific report about this question exactly, that will provide the number crunching that's needed to assure everybody that we can not only bail out students from the debt, but we can make public higher education free for good.
Dr. Stein, I want to ask you a very transparent question. So this is your third time running, and congratulations for that, because I know that cannot be easy or fun. And I know that there are probably a lot of people out there who wonder, who recognize that it is probably a very, very steep climb that you are on right now to try to get where you are trying to go. And I wonder what you would say to the folks who have in the question in their minds, why should I switch? Or why should I go third party? Or for those who might even be at this point where they're saying, why should I vote? What has your experience throughout your career, but also throughout these runs, what has that taught you? And what would you say to people who are asking that question? Is it worth it? Is it worth it to try to go with a third party?
People are taught to be powerless. We have a learned powerlessness thing that is broadcast 24/7 through every possible medium. We are told to think that we're powerless. Why are they working so hard to teach us that we're powerless? Because they are quaking in their boots that we recognize how powerful we are. The poet Alice Walker, who's been a big Gaza Palestine advocate for a long time, one of her famous sayings is, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. I want to remind people, just look at the polls. You've got 63% who say they are ready for a third party because the two majors have done such a bad job. You can look at the studies. A big economic study done maybe 10 years ago, Gillens and Page it's called. It looked at what passes in Washington, D.C. It's things that have a lot of lobbyist money and campaign contributions, not what people want. We are being thrown under the bus. You can look at 44 million people, young people, but not just young people, who are locked in student debt. That's a lot of people. And I have yet to meet the student debtor who understands, oh my God, my debt can be erased, that doesn't want to go for that. It's a matter of getting the word out and showing, we're kind of herd animals as human beings. We do things in a herd. And sometimes it takes a courageous person or a courageous community to stand up. And I very much see Gaza as our moral North Star right now, telling us what we need to do. Because there is no solution for Gaza inside of the two major parties. They are not going to fix it. And for the community of youth, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, which has really been awakened and mobilized around this, it's an unstoppable force when you start putting together these very big demographics. And I think it is a tribute to the sacrifice being made in Gaza right now to believe how far this can go. This can take us to a political revolution we never imagined. Are we going to win the White House? I don't know, but I wouldn't rule it out, and I would take it as far as it can go, and then consider that the jumping off point for the next elections. And this is not just about running for president. As Greens, we're running in lots of elections, including Senate and Congress and locally. There are about 150 Greens serving in office at local levels currently. So it's not just like this is one thing. This is about as many of us as possible standing up and challenging power. We know what needs to be done, and for better or for worse, history has kind of fallen in our laps right now. And I really encourage people who have a deep sense of community service to join us. I don't care what party you're in. You know, just make it not the Democrats or Republicans, because those are big money parties, and we've seen it over and over and over and over again. Money wins the day, and the corporations and the war industry and AIPAC, they win the day more and more. It's not like, oh, it's getting better. It's not getting better. It's actually getting more worse, more extreme. Inequality is more extreme. The climate crisis is more extreme. The wars and the weapons are more extreme. We cannot afford to sit this out. To sit this out is like lying down on the railroad tracks. In my experience as a doctor, people who are in trouble really want a helping hand. And they'll say they don't when there's no helping hand around. But when there is a helping hand, you know, if you've ever seen someone, you know, in deep water and they start coughing and they're choking, they want a hand. They're not going to refuse that hand. That's where we are as a society. We're all going down right now with the ship. And people are waking up to that. And as they do, they are ready to mobilize. And I think the power, the conviction, the insight, the vision of this community, and I mean especially the communities rallying around Gaza to stop genocide. There is so much moral power here. There is so much of the high road, of moral authority. There's no end to the mobilization that we can create right now, right through the election. Let's take this as far and fast as we can and not stop there. That's only the beginning.
I just want to piggyback off that. I know the past 100+ days have been very hard for our communities here and obviously abroad, but as civics in this country, you know, so for somebody to come to me and say, why should I vote? Are they going to change what's happening in Gaza? Are they going to reverse what happened in Gaza? Will Palestine be free, etc.? And we want the right option. And we also want an option that can actually win. So, and you've articulated your positions very well, very structured, but we don't want to wait another 4, another 4, another 4, another 4, another 4. We want something, I know it will take time, but how immediate do you think this can be? I want you to give me just your prognosis of the future. Do you think that we can see a non-Democrat or Republican in office in the near future? And if you can just explain a little bit more as to your path to victory from a mathematical sense.
Absolutely. I see a path to the White House. I'm not holding my breath, but I see that. And that, to my mind, is simply a matter, as Alice Walker said, of us realizing the power that we have. When 68% want a ceasefire because they abhor genocide before their very eyes, that genocide is not going away, has enormous capacity to mobilize us. 68% can be mobilized. I think what we need to do is stand up and lead the way. And the community around Gaza can do that because it has the moral inspiration, depth, and conviction to actually do that, to be the catalyst. And then you add in 44 million students in debt. All they need to see is that, oh my goodness, there is something going on here. 44 million, add to 68% who already want to cease fire. these are the numbers that win elections, especially this election, where right out of the starting gate, you already have 20% of blacks, 20% of Hispanics, and 21% of youth under 35 that are already saying they are voting third party. So I think it's important to feel our strength, to feel what we can do if we are strategic, if we sit down and we create a pathway that mobilizes our communities, that reaches out to mobilize related communities, and we make this happen. I think already you have change makers, you know. Typically it's young people, it's people under 35 who show which way the wind is blowing. They are showing us right now. We need to support them and be with them and work with them. And I think just given the incredible organization that the Muslim community has shown, how many were in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago? Was that amazing or what? Practically 500,000 people. That was so incredibly well organized. There are so many skills and structures within this community that we could really get the ball rolling. Let me just say one other thing, because I want to address how doable this is. Let me get my list here. I want you to know where we are already on the ballot. California, Oregon, Utah, Arizona, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Maine, and South Dakota. We are on the ground. We are on the ground in another 16 states with clipboards, collecting those signatures right now. We expect to be on the ballot in an additional 14 plus the 20 we're on right now. And then to finish it up, as soon as the states say okay, because the states, they all have different rules. It's intended to confuse you. It's intended to block anybody from challenging the powers that be. But we've been watchdogging this for a long time. In 2016, we were on the ballot in 47 states, practically all of them. So we've done this before. We know how to do it. We expect to be on the ballot for all states and to be a force to contend with. And let me tell you one other reality that I find very interesting. Right now, there are a handful of progressive anti-genocide candidates, but they do not have a pathway to getting on the ballot. They have not been on the ballot before. They have no idea what they're in store for. It's one thing to get on the ballot in 5 or 10. It's another to get on the ballot in 50 states, especially the big and difficult ones, which we already have done. We've already done the big difficult ones. We have one more, but we have 5 of the big bad states out of the way already. So we have 75% of the work done if you actually look at the work that has to be done. So we're going to do it. It's not likely the others are. Even RFK, who is talking up a very big game, who has a huge super PAC with very deep pockets, turns out to be 2 people that are providing half of the funding for his super PAC. This is the guy who wants to get money out of politics. He's totally in it up to his eyeballs. I think he just didn't want you to know about it. But even he now is looking at going to the Libertarian Party because it's that hard, even with his $50 million in his super PAC. It's really not easy to get on the ballot. And why can the Greens do it? Because we have a grassroots network, because we have been building community and the fight against empire and oligarchy for a long time. So we have people who are used to watchdogging this in their states. They can do it for really cheap. We expect it to cost us something like $1.5 million. For RFK, he says 18 million, but he's got 50, and suddenly that's not enough. So, we're doing it for really cheap, and we will continue to do that. There is this pathway now because we've got the states. People are on fire. They are tired of being thrown under the bus. They are not going to take it anymore. We're already seeing the rebellion. To my mind, there has never been a moment, such a historic moment, where the need for deep change is so profound, and the possibility of that change is so close at hand. We've never had these conditions where people are ready. People are ready to move or not vote at all, but if they know that there's an option, they are highly likely to vote if they know there's an option that has momentum. So in answer to your question, I wouldn't rule it out if we are strategic and we get to work and we build a coalition to make it happen. I think we can do this.
All right, Dr. Stein. So I know we're over time now, and I know you have another event you need to get to. So I will take the lead in asking the same question to you, that if you were to get the presidency, if you were in the White House in November, or I should say January of next year, would you commit to coming back to our community and setting up a meeting with us within the first 50 days of your presidency?
I would not only commit to doing that, I would have to do that. And let me tell you what Barack Obama did wrong. Well, he was a creature of Wall Street, it turned out. No offense to any Barack Obama fans here, but he had lots of ground troops. But when he got elected, he not only appointed Wall Street people to his cabinet, he told his ground troops to go home. So he did not have the power to move his agenda, probably by design and intent. But for us, that's not the case. We will totally rely on you. So you have to promise me that if you get me in the position, if you get me in that hot seat, you have to be there for us to make this happen together. We need to dismantle empire, dismantle the oligarchy, and create an America and a world that works for all of us.
Thank you, Jill Stein, candidate for president.
Okay, he's like, make a line.
Straight line, please. Oh, group picture? Group picture. Never mind.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. 2024 is going to be a critical year for vote for us. I hope you folks learned something. We wanted to thank Dr. Stein, Dr. Cornel West for attending. And the agenda for today was to educate you guys. To educate, and I hope you folks have taken away something meaningful. And come on up on the stage to take your picture. Thank you, guys.